Hi, it's time for another verb of the day. Today's verb is facilitate. Let's take a moment to look at some of the definitions or the ways that we use this verb. The first way you might hear facilitate used is to mean to make some process or action easy or easier. When started to think about these definitions and how I've heard this verb used, my mind went back to my days before I was a teacher, and I worked for a large corporation. And our corporation decided all of our offices needed to look different. Right? We didn't want to have kind of high walls. There's something called open floor plans. And they thought this design would facilitate communication and facilitate teamwork, make those actions, make those processes easier. Now, after the pandemic and kind of the spread of illness and disease, as well as some people experiencing open offices and finding them very distracting, I don't think they're thought of as highly, but this had been one idea. A second way you might hear facilitate used is to mean to help bring about something. So, with this second definition, sort of think about um, causing something to change, having some type of impact that is bringing about a particular result. A third way you might hear facilitate used is to mean to lead a discussion by asking questions, mediating between opposing viewpoints, and ensuring that all participants' views are heard. So, with this third definition, you might think about possibly, if you have, attended a conference. Right? So, sometimes for professional development in our fields, we attend these kind of large group meetings, and sometimes there's someone in the front of the room lecturing us, but other times there's a person who's asking other people questions and trying to make things a bit more of a conversation. That is where you're going to hear this verb used in connection to that. You should know that facilitate is a regular verb. To make the progressive form of this verb, all I need to do is drop the E because I have a vowel consonant E ending. I'm going to do that before I add the suffix of ing, and that forms facilitating. The past tense and participle forms of this verb can be made just by adding the letter D, since this verb already ends in an E. Our base verb, facilitate, ends in a T sound. And this means that my past tense ending is going to make an id sound as I say it. So I'm going to add an extra syllable to this word when I say the past tense and participle forms facilitated. Facilitated. Okay. Now, you might be relieved to know there are no additional phrasal verbs that we need to study today. So instead, we're going to move on to a little verb tense practice. And this week, in two of my videos, I've decided it would be a good time to review the active and passive voice. So before we make some example sentences, let's review active and passive voice. Most of my videos and most of my example sentences are in the active voice. I begin the sentence with the subject, the person or thing that is responsible for the action in a sentence. Some examples of this might be Brad will wash the dishes. Caroline will eat lunch. In both of these sentences, I know who is responsible for this future action. Right? Brad is responsible for the action of washing. Caroline is responsible for the action of eating. But sometimes when you're reading or as you're listening to other speakers, you're going to notice that they begin their sentences with the person or thing that is acted on. Sometimes you hear this described as the person or thing that's receiving the action or the object of the sentence. So when we begin a sentence this way, we call this the passive voice. Now, the person who is responsible for the action, they might not be included in a passive voice sentence, but if they are included, they're going to come at the end of the sentence after the preposition by. So I'll take my first two active examples and change them into passive voice. I could say, the dishes will be washed Or I could say, lunch will be eaten. And you can see from my notes on the screen, you could also add by and the person's name who's responsible for that action. Now, there are different reasons that people use passive voice. It might be because the person that's doing the action is just unknown, right? And so we don't know who to say is responsible for this particular action. Or it might be that that person or thing just isn't very important. Other times, we might want our readers or our listeners to focus or draw their attention to that object, the person or thing that's receiving the action. Okay? And a fourth reason that comes up is that sometimes, especially if we're maybe talking about something that's a bit uncomfortable, we're talking about a problem, something that went wrong, we don't really want to say who is responsible. So we might call this action blaming. And so to avoid blame, we might use the passive voice. The best example of that is a very vague sentence, so not very specific, right? Mistakes were made, right? I don't know who's responsible for the mistakes. I just know that they exist. Okay? So now that we know a little bit about active and passive voice, let's do some example sentences. And today we're going to focus on active voice in the simple future as well as in the passive voice simple future too. So I feel like if you've been watching many of my videos, you're pretty confident about making active voice sentences. So let's take our attention first to the passive voice. Okay? In affirmative sentences, I'm going to begin with the thing that is acted upon, and then my structure will be to use will, be, and then the participle form of my verb. Here's an example. The conference breakout sessions will be facilitated by professionals actively working in the field. Okay. So here we know uh, which things here, the breakout sessions, those are the ones receiving that action of being facilitated. Okay. Now, another way to say that in the active voice might be professionals actively working in the field will facilitate. There's my simple future. They will facilitate the conference breakout sessions. Okay. Both of these sentences really have the same meaning. Now, let's talk about negative sentences. And again, we'll start with the passive voice. My example here is discussion of politics won't be facilitated in this class. Um, so here we have will not be and then our participle form. Okay? Let's compare that to active voice. We won't facilitate talks about politics in this class because it's too divisive, right? It creates division, makes people fight, not like one another. Okay? That's what's being communicated in that particular sentence. Finally, let's look at making yes or no questions in the passive voice. To do this, again, with the focus on the future, I'm going to start with will. I'm going to have my object. I'm going to use be, and then the participle form of my verb. Here's another example. Will a high income, high productivity workforce be facilitated by a higher minimum wage? Okay. So, um, the reason someone might draw our attention or use the question here in that passive voice, right? You see high income, high productivity workforce. Ooh, that sounds good, right? Really productive people making a lot of money. So that might be, again, kind of a strategy somebody who's communicating with us might use to draw our attention. Let's compare that to the active voice. Okay? If I ask the question, will a higher minimum wage facilitate a high income, high productivity workforce? Here, one of the first things you're going to hear me say is higher minimum wage. And for some people, they just automatically think, oh, nope, I don't support that. I don't want that. And so you kind of lose them. So, again, that might be a strategy someone's using um, when they're utilizing the passive voice. Now, let's continue on and talk about some words that are related to our verb facilitate. And the first word we're going to discuss is the noun facilitation. This is the act of facilitating something, so making an action or a process easier or easy to begin with. An example of this might be the organizations have been working on trade facilitation between the two countries. So maybe we have some business affiliated organizations trying to increase or make trade a little easier or more efficient between two particular countries. Another word you might encounter is facilitator. This is a person or a thing that's going to make some action or process easy or easier. An example of this might be the county has created an election facilitator position, and this person will work with poll workers and manage IT for elections. So it's actually fairly common to see this as a job title. So again, that connection is I'm making something easier, maybe making it a little more efficient. And who doesn't like those things, right? That can sound very attractive, right? We need a facilitator in this particular role. The last related word we're going to talk about today is the adjective facilitative. Many times this is used to mean helpful, right? To describe someone or something that is helpful, or to describe someone or something that is making something else easier. An example of this might be international graduates in Canada with an expiring post-graduation work permit can opt into a facilitative process to extend their work permit. Okay. I saw this example of our adjective here used recently. So I believe this program is still ongoing or just getting started in Canada. And they're trying to note this process is going to be helpful. It's going to make things easier if someone wants to extend the length of their work permit. I hope my videos facilitate a greater understanding of the English language and how to communicate. Thank you so much for watching today. I hope you have a great day.